Good morning, Mike.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us today.
Of course, I appreciate the chance to get to talk to you and have students learn more about us.
Before we begin talking about your role and your career journey, would you briefly describe to us what Huntington Ingalls does?
Right. Huntington Ingalls Industries is one of those large defense contractors that you've probably never heard of. Most folks have heard of Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman. We're the ones who design and build and refuel all the nuclear aircraft carriers, half the nuclear submarines, half of the destroyers, all the naval, all the Coast Guard, larger Coast Guard ships, as well as all the amphibious ships that help land Marines in different countries. So we also perform large maintenance activities and things like that. So we're about a 7.3, call it $7.5 billion company, and most of which comes from those types of that type of business. We're also in the defense services business. So when it comes to logistics management, maintenance, training, some IT services, cyber, things like that, we have a presence there. In fact, we just did a $400 million acquisition of a services company. We are in the oil and gas business. We do front-end engineering and design work for pipeline systems. And then with the work that we do in spent nuclear fuel handling on our shipyards, our nuclear shipyard, we apply those same techniques and that same technical understanding in the commercial and Department of Energy space. So we help them with decommissioning and managing nuclear material and managing environmental risk on those sites. So if you put all that together, that is that's the company. So I'll call it HII for short, but that's who we are. I like to say that we're a 132-year-old startup. We've been around for quite a long time, but we went public in March of 2011. We spun out of Northrop Grumman. So we have a long history. We play a major role in national security and foreign policy, and we're just one of those kind of quiet companies that you may not be all that familiar with.
Very cool. Could you describe to us your role and your past work in HII?
So I've been with HII for only just shy of 2 years. When I was brought in, I worked in the Washington, D.C. office. I was living in the D.C. suburbs. I have 3 boys. One was actually they're all in school at the point in time, and I needed to wait a little bit before moving down to headquarters. So I actually worked in the D.C. office as the vice president of business planning and analysis, and much of that work really was around building relationships with think tanks and some of the industry organizations that we needed to get closer to, like the National Association of Manufacturers and the various oil and gas industry advocacy groups that we hadn't touched before because we were recent entrants in the oil and gas business. So that was my focus. And then when I first came down to headquarters, I started working on a nuclear and environmental strategy, something that we hadn't really done. So that ended up being my focus area. I got into that type of work right after Stanford. I was a Navy ROTC midshipman. I became a Navy nuke officer, which that's when I found out that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. Did really well undergrad, and I co-termed industrial engineering management. Did really well there. And I like to say I unfortunately graduated at the top of the wrong half of the class at nuclear power school. So right there in the middle. So that's where I got my nuclear stamp. And so I understood certainly the, how reactors operate and, the various, cleanup requirements and just all those different facets that you need to understand. And so once I had my arms around the nuclear piece, I was then promoted to executive vice president for all of corporate strategy and planning. And so that role has, the way I see strategy, I see it in three pillars. The first being strategic development. And so that's kind of, what are we going to do based on our competencies and where markets are, where attractive markets are growing. What are the relevant capabilities that where, customers in those markets define success. And then, so that sets up your strategy. And then the next piece is around corporate relationships. And folks say it's always mergers and acquisitions or M&A, but it's also strategic alliances, teaming, joint ventures, things like that. Because what you discover when you go through that first phase, the strategic planning phase, is that you have gaps in your capabilities. Then you decide how you're going to fill those gaps. Some of it you want to fill long term, and that means you're going to acquire that capability in the form of a company, perhaps. You may find that a certain capability is only required for number of programs that you want to pursue. That might be a teaming relationship or something like that. And so you do some gap filling in that second phase of strategic planning. And then the third phase is around business development. Once you know what markets you want to pursue, what spells success in those markets, you've looked at what your competencies are, you filled in some of those gaps, and now you actually go to market and pursue business. So those are the three pieces of the work that I do. So every day is different, which I love. If you want kind of a strict, 9 to 5, 8 to 5 type of job, this type of role just isn't that one. There are a lot of engineers who love definite start times, stop times on a project. They want definitized answers. This is a lot more open-ended. But folks who think that they want to go to a McKinsey or Bain or what have you, those folks tend to have to deal with a bit of cloudiness in the work they do. So yes, that's pretty much the role description for what I do for the company.
Awesome. To help students understand more about the industry that you work in, which students might not be so familiar with, could you describe to us your typical day, as in what is on your calendar for the rest of this day?
Interesting question. So in the strategy role, we have, I like to say that our customers are mostly internal. My customer is the CEO. That's who I report to. But then my team has internal customers as well. We have several divisions, and within those, I'll call them actually segments. Within those segments, we have business units. And so what I'm doing after this meeting is I'm meeting with the vice president of one of those divisions, and then he's going to bring his business unit folks, the person in charge of submarines, the person in charge of aircraft carriers, their internal strategy person. And we're going to sit down and talk about initiatives that we have going on, areas where they need some more support, and things that they're doing to make sure that we're all aligned. I mean, organizational alignment in any company is extremely important. That's that piece. And then my boss, our CEO, he and I have a weekly one-on-one where we just sit down and talk. It's kind of a come as you are meeting, no slides, no agenda. We just sit and talk. He bounces ideas off of me. I get some of my ideas out early so we can go pursue them with a bit more vigor, or we can just cut them off if the interest isn't there. So that's today. tomorrow's going to be dramatically different. I'm going to have my entire team in front of the entire C-suite talking in detail about all the strategic narratives and projects that underpin those stories, so that the senior staff understands where we're going and they have a chance for some Q&A. So it does vary. I spend time doing things like this. I spend time recruiting. I spend time giving back to the community through, I love judging science fairs. That's the kind of nerdy side of me. The company does strongly support community service and involvement. We happen to be the largest employer in the state of Virginia. We have a shipyard in Mississippi, which has made us the largest employer in Mississippi. We're the second largest employer in Alabama. So, the impact we have on the surrounding communities is dramatic and far-reaching. So, the success of our company drives the success of the local economy to a large extent. So yeah, my days are different every day.
Nice. As for the company, what are the 3 big changes you've witnessed since you've joined it?
We're not a fast-moving company. It takes 7 years to build an aircraft carrier. The Navy has a 30-year shipbuilding plan, so we have a lot of visibility into the stability of the business. So you don't see massive change too much, but one thing that I find that there's a deeper, stronger emphasis on is diversity and inclusion. In fact, we've actually, parts of the business have swapped the D&I title, and we're calling it inclusion and diversity. And what we've been focusing on is how do you create a climate and an environment where the least empowered person has the confidence to contribute to the discussion. And that's been a major thrust. When we have every year we have a vice president leadership offsite, and we happen to have them in Atlanta. It's just logistically easy for folks on the East Coast to get there. No layovers. And the benefit of that is that we have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There are a lot of sites and tours and other ways of getting a deeper understanding of the African American community, and we've broadened it beyond that to include LGBT and obviously women, the Latino, the Asian American Pacific Islander population. We have, I've seen a lot more emphasis on employee resource groups, which happen to be, where people of similar backgrounds can coalesce and talk about issues and come together and put together programs. This month is African American History Month, and so the African American Shipbuilders Association is putting on an event. So we have different groups, and we recognize that we need to reflect the community in which we live. We need to reflect our customer, and more broadly reflect the United States. So this is a big push. Another thing that I've seen, and you may splinter this off from the D&I piece, but we have at this company folks who've worked. I gave a seminar on disruption yesterday morning. Another different type of day, right? And we had we talked about millennials, and the average tenure of the folks in that room was 38 years with the shipyard. So there's going to be a bow wave of retirements, and we have to make sure there are people behind those folks who can take up the mantle and continue the good work that we're doing. So we have to think about how do we attract, retain, and unleash, essentially, folks that are kind of coming right out of college. We invest a great deal in training our workforce, and a lot of that's around deck plate shipyard level leadership like foremen and shift supervisors. We'll take someone essentially off the street and train them on how to be nuclear welders. So we take, we do a lot. We invest about $100 million a year in training. But on the professional side and outreach to universities, I think we need to work a bit more. There's some flexibility that shipyards may not afford when it comes to actually doing, welding and all those different elements. But the things that we'd want population to do, we have to recognize that, okay, flexible work schedules are important. On-site, leave at 2 o'clock to attend a child's soccer game. The ability would be important, but the ability to punch back in from home remotely at 7 in the evening, that's something that people would want to do. So, I have the experience of having worked internationally where I had a very, incredibly geographically dispersed team, and, I could always reach people no matter what, where they happen to be. And I wasn't worried about FaceTime or people being in front of me. So we're learning how that's a disruption to our business, but it's a really good one. And we're focusing on how we can improve that experience for millennials. And it's a two-way discussion, right? It's how do these folks who've been with the company for 40 years, how do they impart their tribal knowledge to incoming professionals? But then as learning styles change and evolve, how do these newer employees and younger employees impart their knowledge, kind of up the chain, as our business matures. So, those are two things. I think we're looking at the new administration and how some of those priorities are impacting our Navy. We have about 278 ships. The Trump administration has expressed a desire for 355. So, there's emphasis on how do we shore up and ensure that our supply chain is ready to respond. We're ready to ramp up production, but we can sprint fast, but if no one's behind us in terms of our suppliers, we're going to have a challenge. So those are kind of the three things I'm seeing, mostly cultural, but some of it's operational.
Those are very interesting changes. I'm very excited to see where they will take HII. You mentioned that the company spends about $100 million for training. What kind of personal growth opportunities did you find at the company, and what kind of new grad students expect to find when they join the company?
Well, we do several things where we sponsor folks to go to UVA over at the Darden School and William & Mary at their business school to take courses on kind of finance for managers, economics, strategic leadership, programs like that. We have kind of a spectrum of leadership development programs, from the kind of the junior level shift supervisor piece to all the way up to the director level, folks who are in the running to become vice presidents, who need to have additional leadership management, some of the organizational psychology pieces, some of those softer skills that they may not have picked up along the way. We have training for new managers. So you may have someone who's a fantastic tradesperson, but they've never managed a team. And so just like the best engineer on the fourth floor, may be really good at what she does, but she may never have been put in a management position. So we have training that does that. We have opportunities where we will, pay for higher education for, our employees. a lot of that's around business school. Some of it could be material science, you name it. So, there are a lot of ways that we invest in our workforce. But one of the most important things is we have apprentice schools. So when we talk about investment in education and training, it's not just about sending folks to college. It's about giving employees the kind of mental tools they need in order to do their work more effectively, to do the things that we ask of them. And we've gotten a lot of attention from Washington up on the Hill about the work and investment that we've been doing, and that also includes. In fact, I was walking over to my my seminar on disruption yesterday, and I walked by a room that had been reserved for FIRST, a robotics competition, and we sponsor a team. And I know we sponsor a team down in Mississippi, and so that's another part of recruiting. We're in there. Sponsoring teams and working with younger people to get them interested in STEM type programs and give them that keen understanding of what we do and how science, technology, engineering, and mathematics applies in the shipyard. We also give them kind of a tour and demo of some of the augmented reality work that we're doing, and show them how how technologically advanced the shipbuilding business has become.
Awesome. I can see many similarities that is going on at Stanford that you've been doing, such as like robotics competition and AR. I think I'd love to talk to you about how we could maybe involve you in what's going on at Stanford and increase that cooperation sometime.
I'd love to hear about what you guys are doing. I'm excited about what we're doing here. And, I was talking to one of my directors this morning. And so in the old days, and the old days aren't so long ago, we'll say five years ago, you might have a welder who's welding a piping fixture in place. And that person would have a set of paper drawings, and they would when he would move to the next step, he may have to go somewhere else to pick up the next drawing because someone else might have needed it, and so they're walking to a repository or library, and then they're coming back to the workstation and performing the actual physical work. Well, with where we've moved to digital shipbuilding, we've taken all the plans and designs and put them on tablets. And so that worker doesn't need to leave the station, because every time they leave, that's a waste of time, of their time. So, that's one element. We also have on the AR side, just one of the use cases, a shipyard worker can hold a tablet up, and it will superimpose the detailed design, the production design rather, on the workspace and show where piping should go and where cabling should go and where different parts of the gear should be going, and it'll also show the sequencing of when things should be put in. So there have been instances where you'll put in a cableway that will carry fiber optics and things like that throughout the ship, and they'll find that they have to install something later on that was under that cableway. So now they have to cut the cableway down, pull the cables out, and reinstall. So again, that's a waste of time and cost and all those different things. So, being able to hold a tablet up and superimpose a digital twin of the space is a fantastic way of improving how we build ships. The next advanced forward aircraft carrier will be a drawingless design, which sounds pretty awesome. It'll be fully digitized, and we'll end up building digital twins of each ship. There are tremendous opportunities around data prognostics, where we're collecting data from subsystems and components about how they're behaving. And if we find a component isn't operating correctly based on the current design, we may be able to design in another component that will create the expected operational result. If you have a pump that is having an issue, maybe the outflow from the pump is too hot, because we're measuring that temperature, we may put an inline heat exchanger to cool off the water before it goes into that pump. And we know that through being able to get that data feedback, and then that data feedback can be used to influence the design. I mean, that's just kind of an off the top of my head example, but it's a powerful tool, and it's a powerful way of thinking about how we build ships. It'll help speed up our ability to go from 7 years to build a carrier or what have you, that down to 5, we'll say, at a cheaper price. And all that matters if you're trying to build more ships quickly and more cost effectively.
I think you touched this briefly, but I'd like to hone in on the trends in the defense and or the manufacturing industry. So say a student is in CS program or mechanical engineering or even management science to manage the process. How could this student prepare to be a stronger job candidate for Huntington Ingalls?
Well, it depends on the role. I mean, if someone is a double E and they're interested in designing a electrical distribution system, or looking at helping us with power integration and management systems, a double E background is what you'd find in the company. You'd find people with those expertise. If you have I'd say chemical engineering background, we have a number of folks with that background down in our oil and gas business. We have.
Maybe I could narrow down the question a little bit more.
Sure.
So how would a student in an engineering field study or prepare differently from how they would have prepared themselves maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago to better prepare themselves for the changing industry? So say now the manufacturing is going or AR and superimposing where things should go, or drawing lists. I could see that students will probably be using skills that weren't needed back in the years, or maybe study some new skills that are necessary. So what are some of those changes?
Yeah, I think those programming needs are pretty important. Here's an interesting thing. So if you look at a mega trend, I always start with mega trends, and because of medical advances, people are living longer. They're not living longer in our youthful years, unfortunately. They're living longer in their elderly years, which means there's a higher demand on medical services and Social Security outlays and things like that. So the impact of that is people are really expensive in the end. So when it comes to the military, there's a desire to, not just because of the economics of the human personnel, but also some of the things that the military does that is dangerous. And so, what that means, what that translates into, is the use of autonomous maritime systems. And so the big piece of that is the autonomy element. And that piece is really about software developers who can create algorithms that fuse inputs from various sensors. It could be sonar, radar, LiDAR using lasers, just a number of, it could be thermal magnetic sensors, what have you. And then, those algorithms will send signals to control surfaces that will direct, the undersea vehicle where to go. So the capability is around software, the ability to, to bring on software developers. I think C++ is one of the kind of base languages used for a platform that's been developed by JPL and for NASA. So, just having folks who are smart, who can help develop those algorithms is extremely important. And when you think about a shipbuilder like us, you think about industrial folks and IEs perhaps, but there's a growing need for software developers who are familiar with agile software development. I just in modular software development, I think there's a strong need for that, and it's not going to go away, because the reason why is that mega trend is a sustaining trend. So if you start with mega trends and kind of whittle your way down, we started with demographic shifts from younger to older, and we got all the way down to software development, right? That's an area. I'm biased here. Let's just face it. I was an IE, EM major, and what I liked about that is it gave me a holistic view of how a company operates. The operations research side, helps you optimize your operations, where you're going to locate your factories or warehouses or whatever. You have the accounting side, so the financial and cost accounting side that helps you, obviously manage your capital flows, but it also helps you make decisions around capital deployment. So if I'm going to invest, $1 million on a certain project, well, the returns on that project need to, exceed the cost of capital, and so I need to have ways to compare, at least financially, the benefits of deploying capital in different ways. There's the organizational leadership management element. There's a marketing element. There's a supply chain management piece. All those things you learn in the IE curriculum. So, sometimes folks feel that, well, when you're more senior in a company, that's when all that comes into play. That may be true to an extent, but I do believe that if you're an ME or a double E, it would behoove you to at least take, I don't know if it's called E60 anymore, but take some intro to engineering economy, where you start learning about project finance and some of those different elements that allow you to take a broader view of how a business works.
Does
that answer some of the question?
Excuse me?
I hope that answers some of the question.
Yeah, definitely. It even touched upon the question that I was going to ask just now, which is what you did at Stanford as a student that helped you be in the position you're in now. So I think about those courses that you recommend. It doesn't have to be like specific course number, but the kind of content that you recommend students study.
I'll tell you, I've met folks from all the top universities, particularly folks from, say, Rensselaer and MIT and Caltech, and folks from large schools who were engineering focused. And one advantage that we had at Stanford was that I've met folks from MIT who wrote 3 essays in their entire time of being undergraduates up there. And that's a shame. I would do 3, maybe in a quarter. So the ability to write effectively and convincingly is extremely important. If there are courses that, or a course that, gets you engaged in doing that, I think that's really important. Another bit of exposure folks should ensure they touch would be around speaking, public speaking. That's another weakness I've seen. And as you kind of climb your way up in an organization, the emphasis becomes less on technical skill and more on your ability to represent yourself and your ideas. And so folks who do that most effectively are the ones who will succeed. And we'll be able to, all of us face glass ceilings. At the end, there's kind of a point where folks plateau and feel that they can't move on. Well, what the discriminator becomes is their ability to, go to the C-suite, meaning the CEO, CFO, chief strategy officer, all those folks, and express themselves in a coherent, concise manner. So those are two things that may not be, typically, part of their curriculum that they should work in. There is something, at least when I was at Stanford, and it's probably gotten even better, but you work in teams a great deal. And when you're working in teams, it's not necessarily folks who work for you and folks for whom you work. It's folks who are in different functional areas in a business. So you have no formal reporting chain, but you're going to work in teams. So understanding, being able to value, the inputs of people, and being an effective listener and communicator, and kind of going back to the communications piece, but also being an effective listener helps you be a better contributor on a team. And you're going to find that the team element probably in almost any company that you're in. But most of the coursework I did starting in my sophomore year involved a lot of team projects. But if you find you're not doing that, I think that you need to find some coursework that gets you into that type of environment.
I think that is very well in accordance with how Stanford is also emphasizing even stronger humanities for not only humanities students, but also engineering students. I think it's great.
Well, I think and there's certainly room for all those types of backgrounds. It's interesting. I'll tell you one more story. My dad was in the Army for 22 years. And when he left the Army, he was an artillery officer. When he left the Army, he went and got a master's in social work and became a therapist. And I asked him, he also had a master's in systems engineering. And I told him that's the oddest career transition I ever could have thought of. And he said, as you rise through the ranks in the military, and this also applies in the commercial world, your job becomes less technical skill and more psychology. So having some experience in organizational psych, I think would be a real positive for folks who have the aspirations of moving beyond simply the technical piece. There's a book I'd read over a decade ago. I think it's called Career Warfare. And it talks about putting your boss on the couch, meaning understanding how their brain is wired, how they may react to in different situations. And so it helps you package your messaging for your boss in ways that he or she will be able to take in without kind of jumping through the ceiling. So the psychology element isn't just about when you're on top and managing people. It's also about managing your boss, because you're going to have a boss, in most cases. So yeah, I just wanted to share that piece too.
Thanks for the wisdom. Now we're already closing in on the interview, and there's only one question left. And this one is, how did you research the job you want? So a student is already interested in manufacturing. This student still has to make a choice between making very small things like smartphone or an IoT device to big things like a nuclear ship. So how does one find about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking generically, which is tougher for me because I know my story. And having been in the Navy, the nuclear Navy, every ship I served on was built by this company. And the fact that the folks, I never had to worry about whether or not the ship I was serving on was a quality ship. All I had to worry about was mission. And the fact that our employees, all of our employees, are mission focused. They have a great deal of pride in what they do. Made me, I kind of gravitated to this company But I also learned a few things along the way. This is a third company I've worked for. And so there are three things about my boss that compelled me to join. One, just like you guys, you're going to have lots of choices. But one was around commitment to growing beyond the core business. It's hard to do. It's uncomfortable. It's disruptive. But if you have a boss at the top who's setting that tone, that really creates opportunity for folks who may have unconventional backgrounds. Even though I have a Navy background, I came in with a pretty different perspective. Secondly, values. This is a company that deeply values we want our employees to live fulfilling lives. We want them to have meaningful professional careers, but we also understand that the work we're doing supports people outside the four walls of our offices. And so that's a really that's a core value of the company. When I was commuting from Washington down to Newport News, my boss wasn't worried about FaceTime and getting in to see him. He was worried about my family at home. He was saying, you don't need to be here for this meeting. You can telecommute and all those different things. So that really meant a lot to me because I was with a company before that was very internationally focused, a fantastic company, but because we had a footprint around the globe, you could be on the treadmill at 3:30 in the morning, having a phone call with India, and then you could be up at 9:30 at night having a phone call with Hawaii or what have you. So there's a deep respect for the outside lives of our employees. The third piece is around ethics, ethical behavior. And on a ship, you have something called a center line, and it runs right through the center of the ship, as you'd expect. And to make sure people don't fall overboard, there are lifelines on the side. And for us, when it comes to ethics, we walk the center line. Other companies, you can walk all the way up to those, they're called lifelines, at the edge of a ship and still be on board and not be in danger. But at that point, you're only inches away from splash. And so the analogy is that be all the way against the edge and still be behaving legally. But the ethical piece starts to come into play. And so legal boundaries aren't what we use to set our behaviors. Our behaviors are set on what we know is right, and knowing, doing things, doing the right thing when no one is looking. And that's another core value. And I've gone through scenarios wasn't the case, and I've seen the very personal and heartbreaking challenges that people find themselves in because of other people's actions. So when you do research, I think it's important to have a passion around the central mission of the company. I think it's important to understand what the company truly values, and you start to learn that by talking to people there. Not necessarily through interviews, but maybe some informational interviews. Maybe it's through internships, either paid or unpaid. Those things are not mere abstractions. I think the hottest company may be interesting, but their mission and their values may not be congruent with what you really want.
Thank you for the great advice.
Absolutely.
And once again, thank you so much for your time today.